the parent is punching the child in the face, and you saw it and walked away and didn't say anything because you didn't want to get involved, not your business, anybody has to report child abuse or child neglect. I'm Adam Rossin from the Rossin Law Firm, and in today's video, we're going to talk about the crime of failing to report child abuse or neglect in the state of Florida. So before we go into the consequences of failing to report, let's talk about what child abuse or neglect is. I'm not going to go over every single element in these crimes. We have other videos on that. But basically, when we're talking about child abuse in a situation like this, it's going to be somebody that's just, maybe you see them put a good old-fashioned whooping on somebody in a parking lot, on their kid, at the school, at home, in the neighborhood. And then neglect could be a situation of, well, you leave your kid in the car while you go to the Hard Rock to gamble for 3 or 4 hours, right? That could be a situation of neglect. So we have abuse and we have neglect. And failing to report either is a crime in the state of Florida. So let's dive deep and go into these right now. So the crime of failing to report child abuse or neglect in Florida really only has 2 elements. Number one, it's intentionally and willfully, means you have to know that it was going on and made a conscious choice to not do anything. Okay, that's intent or willful. And then failing to report. Basically, the second part is not reporting it to anybody, not reporting it to DCF, not reporting it to the police or the authorities. And really, it's just those 2 prongs. And the interesting thing about this crime is people think, generally speaking, that they don't have a duty. Well, in fact, everybody has a duty. The way the law is written, everybody in Florida has a duty to report this. It's not just what people call, quote unquote, mandatory reporters. So let's talk a little bit about the difference between a normal person and mandatory reporter. So let's talk about mandatory reporters. Mandatory reporters, number one, is a certain class of individuals based on their profession. They are required to report and give their name. So we're going to be talking about doctors, nurses, teachers, child welfare workers, police officers, and judges. And that's just a few. That's not a full exhaustive list. But those are the people that we all consider, well, and the law actually says, are mandatory reporters. And so they must give their name. Now, their names are exempt from public record as part of the investigation. But that's what Florida law actually defines as a mandatory reporter. Now, if we compare this, okay, everybody else, me, you, anybody watching this, we are still under the same legal obligation that mandatory reporters are under, except we don't have to give our name and information. But we can still get arrested and still get charged and still potentially get convicted for failing to report child abuse or neglect. Now, it's rare, but let me give you a few examples of how this can actually happen to you. So now that we've learned that anybody has to report child abuse or child neglect, let's talk about some examples. So imagine you're taking your toddler to daycare or preschool, and you see another parent in the parking lot just beating their child, putting a whooping on them. Most people are going to say, not my kid, not my business. I'll let you go ahead and, I might not agree with that, but you go ahead and do your thing. Well, technically, if the whooping is considered child abuse, let's say it's a belt and it's the belt buckle, or the parent is punching the child in the face, and you saw it and walked away and didn't say anything because you didn't want to get involved, not your business, technically, that's failing to report child abuse. Is that likely to happen? No, but technically under the law, it could. Same thing with child neglect. So let's say you drive to the casino and you park and you see that there's a toddler in the car, and we're not talking like hot and there's, it's like 100 degrees out, right? But there's just a toddler left alone in that car, and you wait around for like 3-4 minutes and mom or dad doesn't come, and you're just like, screw it, I'm not going to get involved, and you walk away. Technically, if you were caught, if anybody found out that you saw that, did that, and did nothing, then you would be, in trouble or arrested and charged with failing to report child neglect. Those are rare circumstances. Where it really comes more into play, especially when it makes TV headlines and stuff like that, is when we're talking about serious abuse, usually within the familial home, the family home, usually of a parent on kids, when we've talked about or seen situations where there's been maybe a dungeon, or somebody is confined to the basement. Usually there's some severe mental health issues. You hear stories of this every few months across the country, and maybe the father's the one abusing the child, but the older siblings or the wife will get arrested for failing to report this. That's probably what we see as the most common result. And these cases are not very common at all, but that's what you got to understand, some examples of this. But it's important because people actually don't know the law, right? It goes back to that, what's a mandatory reporter actually mandatory have to do, which is just give their information, because everybody is a mandatory reporter if you see abuse. Now, what are the penalties for this? We're talking third-degree felonies in Florida, max prison of up to 5 years, okay, or probation, or any combination thereof, up to $5,000 fine. But it's a felony, it's serious. Are you going to go to prison for the rest of your life on a case like this? No, but this is a felony. And for most people who just don't want to get involved, this is very serious. Can you imagine, just saying, hey, not my family, not my kids, not my parenting style, and then get arrested for this? So to me, that's kind of crazy. So how do we defend these cases? Well, one way is really trying to have that distinction between, did the person really know or have reasonable cause to know, versus just gossip, versus just hearing some stories or just seeing some things that could be misunderstood. Because a lot of times the line of abuse in general, when we're defending child abuse or child neglect charges, the line is very thin between what is and what's not. So if the line's very thin on that, then the line is very thin as well on reporting it or being charged with failing to report. So a lot of times there's gossip in the neighborhood, or he said, she said, or, well, we look at things, and in a lot of type of cases, we look at things and we're just not exactly sure. We don't have the full picture to the story. So we'll just say, look, since I don't really know the full picture, I'm not going to do anything. And that's a situation where we've been able to successfully win these cases in the past. We've had other cases where it's just a flat out witch hunt, and it's done for political reasons, and it really takes time unraveling that witch hunt, unraveling those political reasons, maybe a little bit of mitigation as well, but just telling the full story and the full picture. Because just because they, meaning police and prosecutors, think that they can prove element 1, 2, and 3, doesn't mean that when we push forward, defend the case, and maybe go to trial, that all of those things actually can be proven, or a jury would believe it. So there's a lot of things that we can do on these cases. They are rare, but if you're watching this video, hopefully you've enjoyed it. Feel free to look into more stuff that we have on child abuse, child neglect, all those type of issues and cases. If you have any questions, give us a call, 754-206-6200.